Hello and welcome to the 7th episode of the NYU Wagner Students for Criminal Justice Reform podcast. With me today is Sheba Rivera and Chris Gentile, Deputy Director of the Public Policy Symposium. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to be here as always.
So I heard that at the immigration debate today at the Public Policy Symposium, there was a bit of a kerfuffle. Do you mind elaborating on that, Chris?
Sure. On the topic of amnesty today, should we say the process of amnesty, or should we consider amnesty? There was a bit of a hiccup between we have 6 caucuses ranging across the spectrum, the political spectrum, some even, so to say, off the spectrum, and there was a bit of a disagreement over certain issues, including deportation and the amnesty, so to say, what the amnesty debate on the levels of amnesty.
Yeah, I find that sometimes the political discourse conflates amnesty and legalization. Was that sort of one of the issues, one of the sticking points?
The main debate happened between the more leftist, the extreme leftist view of citizenship for all, and the more, should we say, conservative model where it's a pathway to citizenship. So on the spectrum that we saw at the debate today, those were the two sides.
Yeah, I'd say there was some, I was there for a bit of the conversation, just as an observer, and it seemed like there was a lively conversation about the difference between, just legal recognition, documentation, citizenship, just trying to piece apart all these different levels.
So were there Republicans in favor of amnesty? Or was there just a guy just screaming at them that they were?
No, actually, it was very surprising. I wouldn't go so far as to say complete amnesty in the model of citizenship. I would say legal recognition, the ability to receive documentation, receive social security numbers, and be recognized by the United States government, but not have the complete benefits, should we say, of citizenship, such as voting power. And mainly voting power. That was the only thing that was crossed off the list of things that the now legal residents would have.
Oh, that sounds a little bit like Rubio and Cruz's Gang of 8 proposal.
It more followed that structure, a integration rather than full-on citizen, like your integration over citizenship or deportation.
Do you want to say more about what that is, Thurston?
Well, I'm not an expert on the specifics of Gang of 8, but essentially what the Gang of 8 was a bipartisan group that was working on immigration reform in the early 2010-2012 era. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to close the border and create a pathway to legalization for the people who are here and abiding by the laws. So like Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz got painted with the amnesty brush. But really what they wanted was just a way for these people not to live in fear, a way for them to start paying taxes, a way for them to be fully integrated into American society. But one of the main sticking points was securing the border. And the use of E-Verify, I think, was another point of contention because, ideally, one of the ways that you prevent illegal immigration is by reducing the economic incentive to come in. I think, well, not to go too far back in history, but cracking down on the border in the 1960s sort of had the opposite of the intended effect, because instead of people being migrants, economic migrants, coming into the United States for 6 months and then returning back to Mexico, they were like, all right, if I'm going to risk getting caught every time I cross the border, I'm only going to cross once.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of conversation about deportation. Now that you bring that up, I think some people were also stuck on, does it matter if you are threatening deportation? Because it's not a deterrent for coming in this country if what you're leaving is so terrible.
Yeah, no, Central America right now is kind of having problems. I mean, if I were in Central America, I would risk being deported.
And that's something that I found most surprising today, was that it was actually the 4 other caucuses that disagreed with the Republicans and Democrats over the deportation debate. The Democrats and Republicans kind of came to a agreement that deportation was the, so to say, the ultimate result if a immigrant or a now legal resident, should we say, as per the consensus by all the caucuses, if an immigrant was to go beyond what I think the language they put was moral turpitude, and commit such a heinous crime that they would first fall to the Penal Code of the United States and serve their time, and then after be deported.
Well, I mean, given the costs of incarceration, it better be worth it.
That was one of the first debates I've ever seen where Democrats and Republicans have come together over an issue where I thought I saw no middle ground in.
And why do you think that is?
In the deportation debate? In
this policy debate at all. It was interesting. I was a part of this last year when the NYU Politics Society held their first annual Public Policy Symposium. And I thought it was pretty surprising how in many instances we were able to come to agreement in things that Congress is not able to come into agreement on.
Well, I feel as when you have a bunch, for the most part, of 18, 19, 20-year-old, including some grad students coming in and debating, we see it from a different point of view. We don't have followers. We don't need to get voted into office. We can say what we want, and we can come together really as a community to try to solve the problem rather than keeping our jobs by causing problems that we believe would keep us in office or give us political points if we were looking to move up the ladder.
Yeah.
Reminds me of a podcast actually Sheba shared with me from Planet Money, where they were talking about all the good ideas that every economist from every side of the aisle agrees on that would never, ever make it in an election.
Exactly.
Yeah, and also I think it's the determination of students to actually get something done, which doesn't necessarily exist with politicians who know that their job actually might be more secure if they do nothing, versus I think students are actually trying to do some good in the world, even if it means making compromises.
Although blocking bad bills is doing good.
I guess that depends on who's allowed to determine what bad is.
Well, I think that if, let's say, Trump decides that he wants to cast out 11 billion people and Democrats filibuster, a lot of Democrats would say, yeah, this, wall of blue stopping this tyrannical movement is, heck yeah, that's great. One of them's reading Green Eggs and Ham. It's great.
Yeah, I guess I wonder how much Trump can do. I mean, we already have so much immigrant detention in this country. I think almost 500,000 people that are in jail, and we're paying for that And to me, that already doesn't make a lot of sense, to have people in jail versus out in society. I mean, number one, they're people, and their crime is not being born here and living here, and they could be a part of our society paying taxes, and instead they're in immigrant detention centers.
I think that I think everyone can agree that our immigration system is god awful, because we've got people who are incredibly skilled, well educated, and ready to work, who are spending like 4 or 5 years trying to get into this country, and we want them here. I think that sometimes part of the frustration with sort of this pathway to citizenship or pathway to legalization is the feeling of unfairness. But that unfairness is from the fact that our actual immigration system is broken. We capped our worker visas very low. We really underestimated how many workers were coming into the country. And that's just been a constant problem for us. There's very high demand to move into the country and work. But, you know, we instead have massive lines. It's not workable.
Right, unless you have a lot of money. Unless you invest in a church, then you get a green card.
And that's really one of the reasons why we decided to tackle the immigration reform debate when we did, like especially when we were first sitting down and trying to discuss a topic in the early spring of last year. The Republican primary was still going on, and you could just see how big of an issue this would become later in the election, and even after the election. With at the time we didn't know who was going to be president, but especially now. That immigration reform was kind of thrown into the spotlight.
You know, I think that the momentum on immigration, like some of the extreme stuff that was talked about, it's already gone. The numbers that have been quoted have been dialed back. It's been removed from certain websites. I think that what we might see is sort of something similar to the Gang of Eight, where it's you've got to secure the border and you create a pathway. I think that the president-elect mentioned something along those lines one of these weeks, but you never know. Changes. I'm hopeful. I'm always optimistic. I'm foolishly optimistic, actually.
Yeah, I have to say what's interesting is, you know, I think we're still making this transition in this country between the campaign and reality. And what I love about the symposium is that people who are involved are forced to do that and forced to get away from the rhetoric and into what does any of this actually mean. You know, we talk about things like security and citizenship, amnesty. What do all these terms mean? What does it look like when you try to make a policy while caring about citizens' rights and actual people and in taxes? What are all of the different policies that have to be in place or have to be taken down in order to realize the rights that we all want to see?
And just in that amnesty debate today, we could see how much these policies basically stacked on top of one another, and removing one of these or even not having a complete policy would be detrimental to the entire, should we say, policy, all of the policies combined, because they really do build off of one another. Like the amnesty debate today was not finished, and it really leaves a lot of the other topics we need to talk about up in the air until it's solved, because that will be the defining point for moving forward.
I personally view immigration as, on average, like a net positive. I think that some of the concerns about sort of the adverse selection problem, where you've got a lot of sort of refugees practically coming from South America. And then you've actually got refugees coming from Syria and other parts of the Middle East who have been displaced. And people wonder, like, how can these people contribute to our economic system? Aren't they going to consume resources, and resources people view as scarce right now, which in a lot of state governments they are. So how did that sort of concern about adverse selection play out at this symposium? Did it come up, the economic part?
Absolutely. We certainly discussed how different states would deal with different problems. One of the main issues that we tackled earlier in the morning today was the refugee debate. And not only about Syrians, although it did somewhat focus in or hone in on them specifically, but we did talk about refugees coming from everywhere. I believe currently the United States accepts something, I do not recall this number, I could be completely made up for all I know, but 85,000 refugees currently a year. And we tackled that and how states could, so to say, distribute their resources amongst each other, where wealthier states and states that are more built to deal with diversity and to be able to or integrate these people better would unfortunately bear the burden, while some of the states would not.
I'm trying to think of large states with decent budgets. Really, the list is kind of short.
Exactly, and it came in the debate today about refugees. It felt like the majority of should we say, the ocean states would have to bear the burden, because they have the budgets, they have the resources. A lot of these, especially the major metropolitan areas, have places where these people can integrate better because they have these language programs built. They have these organizations to help immigrants integrate into society better. And they have those support resources where in other areas they might not have.
So worker visas, especially skilled worker visas, did those come up? Because I know that on the campaign trail, that was sort of an issue.
Yes. So the actual H1, what is it, H1B?
Yeah.
The H1B debate is actually tomorrow, but based on what was being said today, because of course a lot of these policies overlap and it was brought up in a different debate, it felt as though surprisingly enough, the majority of the caucuses felt that the program should be expanded or even enlarged, which was different than that of what the voice was in the Republican primary, especially with the limiting of these visas and how they are replacing American jobs and doing it for cheap labor. But in the long run, it seems like a more beneficial plan to invest in skilled labor, because as we've seen, the United States is very good at producing these, so to say, more. How should I say this? Higher education jobs, where advanced degrees, but we lack that middle ground. We lack that. We have unskilled and extremely skilled, but the United States has been very poor at that middle ground, and that's something that those visas would supplement.
Yeah, the way I view it, or at least I've tried to explain it, is that when you're sort of like drafting your team, and in the U.S., it's like you've got like a good pitcher and you've got like a decent like catcher, but you need people on bases and you need people in outfield, and we just don't have those. Mm-hmm. And if we bring them in, our team is going to be better. But I mean, the idea that importing labor destroys jobs it's not conservative. And for the longest time, the Republicans were the ones sort of pushing for H-1B visas, but against sort of illegal immigration. I think the line was, let's do it the right way. So let's issue worker visas. And the idea that you're importing cheap labor ignores the fact that the savings garnered from like finding a programmer in another country who's willing to come here and work, that gets passed on in the production savings, and that results in you being able to buy more stuff. So even if a small group of people is made worse off through either labor-saving technology like the fast food booth things that are replacing cashiers, or by importing a programmer from a different country, you, like as an individual consumer, are better off because you're able to buy more stuff with the money that you have. At least that's what we used to say.
Well, I would say that even based on current economic models, it is still like that opinion is still consistent in the way that a lot of the larger scale businesses are run. Like even look at today, Walmart. Walmart imports cheaper goods from overseas, and so like I was reading something the other day, and it like the amount of money U.S. consumers save per year buying these
It's astronomical.
it's huge, and like these savings are so important to our society because they honestly they are passed mainly on to a lower class of people.
Absolutely.
And it very
it's
much
not
enhances
politically advantageous to say that.
Yeah, and I actually don't think that it's helpful for Walmart to be saving all of the money that it does and be paying workers as it does. And then Walmart, if I'm correct, benefits from a number of initiatives, right, where they receive money from the government.
Yeah, so Walmart will do this thing where
and yet their workers also are usually social service recipients.
Yes, but what I would say is that if we had a minimum income, a negative income tax, or a mincome, or a universal basic income, those people would also be receiving benefits. Yes, we are subsidizing a portion of our labor market, but the savings that Walmart passes on to the consumer means that a family living in, rural Tennessee with like below poverty income is able to actually buy groceries. They're able to own a home because their weekly expenditures are so much lower than they otherwise would be.
Yeah, I could understand that. I still think that it's very hard to own a home right now, especially post housing crisis. And we place again a number of initiatives to make that even possible. So it's easier if it's your first home to purchase that. I feel like because workers are not paid that much, there's really not a level playing field out there. And there's a number of things that we do in terms of laws and initiatives just to try to level out that playing field, and it's not quite working out. And I think that's why a lot of workers were voting for Trump and saying we need something different.
Well, I think that is true, that people felt that they were being cheated. Specifically, I think that the idea that Chinese currency manipulation and subsidies to like their steel industry create the sort of vision of unfair competition, or a lack of a level playing field. But what I would say is that when China taxes its people in order to subsidize its steel industry and then sells that steel on the national market, the gap between China's steel and the global price is not hurting us. We're actually saving money when we buy it. it's mainly hurting China because they are taxing their people in order to prop up these steel producers that are not really able to compete on a global market without those subsidies. Now, yes, it hurts our steel manufacturers, but the rest of our economy, anything really involved in steel, which is pretty much everything, from construction to cars to you name it, those end up spending less and costing less, improving our quality of life and our purchasing power.
Point. It's funny. I feel like a lot of times we don't kind of play the tape out and think about what a lot of these policies do at the end of the day, and the incentives that they create and the perceptions that they create in the public. Do you think that that's something that's done in the Public Policy Symposium, that people try to play the tape out? Is it more just putting on Band-Aids and trying to come to a consensus at the end of the day?
Well, I feel like everyone starts out trying to solve the problem in the way that they best see fit, coming out with a comprehensive plan, one that extends for years into the future, especially last year in the criminal justice debate. That one we were planning out for years and years ahead. I remember me, you, and a couple of the other caucuses hashed out the abolishment of private prisons, more or less, over 15 or 20 years. This was not something that was going to happen overnight. We were planning our way into the future and trying to see how we could move the resources around appropriately. Unfortunately, just because you have a plan and you believe your plan of action is the proper one to take, politics then comes into play in the actual negotiations, and things get chipped away. Other caucuses try to input their plan, and it really comes down at the end of the day on the solution that unfortunately satisfies everyone and does a good enough job where no one's so angry that it doesn't fully work, but it doesn't accomplish the job you originally set out to do.
Right. You're just trying to chase the people who are plotting, behind back doors, and while you're at the same time trying to figure out what's actually going on the floor.
Hopefully no one pushed anyone in front of a train.
It got close last year, I have to admit.
Well, we still have one day left.
Yes.
Tomorrow. Let's not try to jinx it.
We'll try to make it run as smoothly as possible, and that's one of the reasons me and Nicholas Garcia, the director, and our committee, we do weeks, if not months, of prep for this. We try to assume where the position is eventually going to fall, but once again, we're always off because that's the nature of politics. And we try to plan out as far ahead as we can to try to see on where the common ground is in advance and what topics would be the most beneficial to everyone, because they could enact some sort of policy that not only their caucus believes, but everyone as a whole believes, so we can actually accomplish something at the end of the symposium.
So I have a question. Now, you mentioned at the start of this that there are many different factions. You mentioned the socialists and the communists, and I assume that the ANCAPs didn't show up because they don't believe in it. Is it possible that having a more diverse field of perspectives than what we see in our government, because of the sort of two-party system, does that have a coalition building effect on Republicans and Democrats? If I'm a Democrat and I've got a communist next to me saying that property is theft, do I turn to the Republican and say, yeah, we could do some tax reform, I think?
That's exactly, honestly, that's exactly what we saw today in the amnesty debate. The Republicans and the Democrats were agreeing on the role of deportation when it comes to amnesty, while the four other caucuses, including the students of color, communist, socialist, and the Green Party were all saying that citizenship should automatically be a right. And that's when the Democrats needed to turn to the Republicans because they were under attack from, should we say, the farther left. And they needed to turn to the Republicans to get support so they would not be thrown under the table and their policy would basically be destroyed by a counter majority that really none of us saw coming.
Makes me wonder what would happen if we had a parliamentary system.
Yeah, and well, another interesting part was I think the Republicans were not in the room or somehow were out of the conversation about taxes. And a number of things were decided upon without their consent or without their knowledge. And
sounds like Connecticut, actually. They don't let them into the budget or tax conversation. No, I'm serious. They lock the door. They don't let the Republicans in.
Well, that's kind of what happened today. A couple of the Republicans took it. The couple of the Republican negotiators went out on their own and negotiated a tax plan with the Democrats or with all the other caucuses, should I say. And when that was reintroduced as saying this is the consensus of the party on taxes, some of the Republican members were very upset and tried to really split that opinion and try to, they say, counter the plan that was already proposed and signed by their members. And that's something that they're probably going to have to work out tomorrow with their members and try to compromise with the other parties, because in the end, we wind up having a single-payer healthcare program as well. And the Republicans were not too happy about that.
I can imagine.
Well, I'm sure they didn't want to take the time to write their own either. So
it's been out there. There's a PDF of it. You just got to look it up. It's called Better Way.
I think the last time they wrote their own was Obamacare. So.
Oh. Those are fighting words.
Although I will say that I do kind of like Paul Ryan's Better Way plan. It is very similar to Obamacare. And especially the Medicare proposal basically turns Medicare into Obamacare. But the indirect funding sources, I feel, will sort of mitigate the threat of death spiral.
But that was a lot of what Republicans wanted and got a lot of what Obamacare is now. So that doesn't really surprise me. But it needs everybody signing on to it. Including all the states. And sometimes I wonder about all the conversations that happen in Public Policy Symposium. It's hard to tease out what is federal, what they're allowed to do through federal policy versus through state policy. Sometimes you forget that everyone there can agree on something, but a state may say, we're not doing that. We're not coming on to that, just like they did with Obamacare. And how does that affect the whole policy when it comes down to insurance? Everybody's got to be on board, or else, rates are going to be higher than expected.
And that's something we saw a lot last year as well, the difference between federal and state policy, which is why this year we attempted to clarify it by saying we are enacting a federal policy. But then even today, we saw the Republicans challenge the refugee thing, saying that states would cut funding to certain NGOs and not only NGOs, but state-run programs that would assist these refugees. And it would then again fall onto the federal government and further strain the resources that were already balanced, or should we say unbalanced, but budgeted, to fill those gaps in the states.
Well, I mean, I think that the flexibility that delegating so much power to states offers is one of the reasons why we're able to stay a United States despite being, 11 distinct regional cultures. I mean, in New York, it's hard to find anyone who supports gun rights, but in Texas, it's hard to find anyone who doesn't,
Well, it depends on where you look.
Yeah.
In New York and in Texas, so to say.
Yeah. Austin doesn't count.
And then New York City doesn't count for gun rights because I think it's the exact opposite.
Fair enough. Northern New York's not so bad. Not so bad.
Even Long Island is pretty loose on it.
Oh, that's good. Long Island just moved up on my list. That's good.
I think it is, the more black people are around, the more they want to try to hide the guns.
Yeah, that angers me to no end.
The NRA is all for gun rights until a black person has a gun. And then they're like, whoa, no, hold on, not so fast.
That's true. Like until the Black Panthers in the 1960s were like, you know what, gun rights are human rights. Then all of a sudden the NRA and the conservatives were like, oh, maybe we should have national gun control. Just, good grief.
Well, I'm very interested in tomorrow's symposium. Definitely going to be there.
What's your schedule like?
Well, tomorrow the symposium starts at 1 p.m. on the 3rd floor of G Castle. And tomorrow our first two topics will be, or we have one major topic and two minor topics going on. So the major topic is 2 hours, the minor topics are an hour each. And our major topic tomorrow is border security, while our two minor topics, our first minor topics, will be entitlements and sanctuary cities.
Oh, now that's interesting. So, first of all, in terms of border security, what are some of the options? Because they build tunnels under walls. They've made submarines out of cars. They've created catapults. And I just any sort of physical barrier, I just don't see working.
And that's something that the caucuses had to tackle. They could have, a lot of them targeted the Trump proposal of a wall, while many did more comprehensive things such as increased biometrics, scanners, sensors, cameras, increased number of Border Patrol agents, and some of them said that we should really just we should decrease it all and save the money, and because it's not working. And that's a debate that the caucuses are going to have tomorrow.
Was E-Verify kicked around at all?
It was today, but we tried to save it for tomorrow because our last major topic tomorrow from 4 to 6 will be visas. So that's when we really feel like it's going to come into play.
Yeah, I feel that if you can limit the opportunity to find work as a illegal immigrant, you can sort of remove the economic migrants from the equation, which, honestly, I feel like that's most of what's happening, because you've got people who come here on a temporary visa, find work, and they go, well, pay is a lot better. maybe I'll just stick around.
Yep. And a lot of the companies, they only screen at the beginning when a visa is valid, and very rarely do they go back and look to see whether a employee is kept up with their visa status. So it's definitely something that's going to be debated tomorrow, and we're going to see how it turns out.
Now, sanctuary cities, I imagine that to me is sort of like a states' rights issue. Yeah. Sorry.
No, absolutely. No. I was about to say absolutely, but that's a debate that we're going to leave to the caucuses, and we're going to see, should the federal government step in to limit sanctuary cities, because theoretically, a federal organization, ICE, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement, really does have jurisdiction over the issue.
Yeah.
So it's really a federal versus states' rights issue, and that's something that's going to have to be settled between the caucuses.
It's one of those things where it's just like, if you allow the federal government to tax you a lot under the belief that they're going to pay you back with services or grants or whatever, there's always going to be strings attached. And that sort of dynamic, you're giving them power anytime you let them tax you more, because they can always just withhold. If that's what the sort of precedent gets set by this sanctuary cities bill. Yeah, no, that's scary. And hopefully they'll also reform the tax code so it won't hurt as much.
No, it's very true. I just feel like a lot of what we're doing with these policies is creating more, it's costing us more than we're getting out of it.
Yeah.
You know, I really don't want to be paying for us to round up undocumented individuals.
Well, unfortunately, that's one point of view. Many people would say that it's saving the economy money because it's giving American jobs and Americans who pay taxes back. That's another point of view. And that's something that we allow to be discussed at a symposium, something that may be shot down in a classroom or be withheld at especially NYU. We allow that to be spoken in a classroom, to hear that opinion in a formal setting where you can write a policy, you can look up research, and you can propose this to a group of people who are there to listen. They might not agree, but they'll listen to your policy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like there's been some conversation at Wagner on whether or not faculty shut students down. I've heard both sides. I think every faculty has their own view, and it's usually the times when the teacher says, listen, this is my view and you're allowed to disagree, when we've had the most dynamic classroom settings. You know, you just get it out of the way. Well, we all feel differently. This is how we all feel, and then we can move on from there and just try to figure out what the landscape looks like, what all the options look like. Yeah, that is something I really enjoy about the symposium too. I think you do a great job with putting that together.
Thank you.
Well,
and good luck tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you.
Luck. Thank you for coming on.
No, thank you guys for having me.
And to our audience, if you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe, and thank you for joining us. Good night.